No, 12% of the whole population. Yes. Okay. March 16th, 1940. Finland has been fighting off the Red Army of the USSR since the beginning of December in some of the most appalling conditions for war imaginable, with temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees. But this week, the winter war ends. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Adolf Hitler signed a directive for Germany's coming invasion of Denmark and Norway. Chiang Kai-shek had talks with reps from the Japanese invading his China, and the Finns sent a delegation to Moscow to negotiate an end to the invasion of their country. They discover that negotiate to Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov means accept whatever terms he issues. Molotov conceded that perhaps Finland may not have wished to be a pawn of the Anglo-French strategists, but nevertheless, that was how it had worked out, and it was from that diplomatic and strategic fact that the current discussion would have to proceed. Well, you can imagine how happy this makes the Finns. Molotov reads out the peace terms. The Soviets will move the Finnish border and take the whole Karelian Isthmus, including Viipuri. This region is currently home to 12% of the Finnish population. The Soviets will lease Hanko Peninsula, take the Ribaki Peninsula, a bunch of islands off the coast, and some land near Salla. This is all roughly 25,000 square miles of land, but perhaps more importantly, includes every naturally occurring defensive line Finland has. Finns in the ceded land will have 2 weeks to evacuate. They can choose to remain in their homes and become part of the Soviet Union, but spoiler, not a single one will. Well over 450,000 Finns are rendered homeless. Finland will have to build and pay for a rail connection from the Murmansk Railroad to Tornio on the Swedish border. The Finns say they have to discuss all this with Helsinki. Well, okay, this actually happened just as last week ended, so they did. The fighting is still going on in the field, though, since the Soviets said there would be no armistice until peace is signed. The Finnish army, however, is beyond the breaking point. There is no artillery ammunition. Rifles are worn out. Units are down to a fraction of their strength. So the Finnish delegation is told that since they cannot carry on the fight, do whatever you think is best, as long as you are unanimous on it. Finnish Prime Minister Risto Ryti tries again negotiating with Molotov, pointing out that the Soviets have not actually conquered most of the land they are demanding. Molotov says, well, if you like, we can wait until we do conquer it and then come back here and talk again. The Finns begin drafting the treaty with all of the Soviet demands. Now, France and Britain see the Winter War slipping away, and with it, any legitimate excuse for landing troops in Norway to stop the iron traffic to Germany. So they try to do anything they can to keep it alive. See, on the 11th, Finnish President Kyösti Kallio again appeals to Norway and Sweden for foreign troops' right of passage to Finland. But this is really just something for the record. William Trotter thinks this is done to cushion the Finnish public from the shock of the Soviet terms, like they'd think they had no choice because help could not arrive in time. Well, the British and French take advantage of this plea. Prime Ministers Neville Chamberlain and Edouard Daladier announce in their parliaments that they are ready to aid the Finns with anything at their disposal. Chamberlain tells the Finnish ambassador that all the Finns have to do is appeal, and a squadron of bombers will head for Finland at once. There are also those like British Chief of Staff Edmund Ironside who advocate just heading in and bullying their way through Norway and Sweden over any local opposition that might arise. What they finally decide is to launch the Narvik part of their Norway invasion, push past any Norwegian resistance, and then demand passage at the Swedish border. Thing is, if the troops actually make it to Finland, Britain and France will be involved in an active war against the USSR. Nobody really seems to consider that, though. What they think will happen is landing in Norway to minimal opposition, Hitler counterattacks, and the real fight, that against the Germans, can get going far from their own lands. General Powell writes on the 13th, of the 4 or 5 divisions that might have been sent, Not one division was intended for Finland, perhaps a brigade or two if they were lucky. The rest were simply for occupying and holding the iron ore mines. They weren't intended to go anywhere near Finland. It is really a most dishonest business. The Finns, not being quite as gullible, trusting, or stupid as hoped, do not make the appeal, and the treaty ending the Winter War is signed in the early hours of March 13th. Outside of Finland, people are fairly surprised by the peace terms. Stalin takes only around 10% of Finnish land and does not press on and try to occupy the whole country, which he likely could have done. World War II, day by day, has this to say. The Finns never had more than 200,000 men in the fight and have lost 25,000 dead and 45 to 55,000 wounded. Altogether on the Soviet side were 1.2 million men, 1,500 tanks, and 3,000 planes. Official sources put their losses at 48,000 dead and 158,000 wounded, but this may well be a considerable understatement. The disparity in losses suggests to Allied and Axis observers that the effects of Stalin's officer purges have still not been overcome. The Soviet Red Army may in fact have had as many as 250,000 men killed. One Soviet general says, on hearing that they get the whole of Karelia, "We have won just about enough ground to bury our dead." Max Hastings says that Soviet prisoners released by the Finns are dispatched by Stalin to the Gulag to contemplate their treachery in having accepted captivity. Trotter says that several defectors in a position to know claim that every prisoner is taken to NKVD camps, interrogated, and shot. The Finnish numbers might seem small, but remember, this is a country of under 4 million people at the time. You're looking at losing over a couple percent of the entire population in just 105 days. As for the Allies' Norway plans, it is on the 11th that the British War Cabinet decides to send a force to Narvik and seize the 1.5 million tons of iron ore waiting to be shipped to Germany, and will prepare to move across the border to the Swedish Gällivare iron fields. The code name for this action is Wilfred, and they will afterwards land at Stavanger, Bergen, and Trondheim. Wilfred is formalized the 12th. They also decide that they will not communicate any of this to the Norwegian government until the ships have actually arrived at Narvik. However, as soon as the treaty between the USSR and Finland reaches London, they reconsider, and on the 14th, they abandon Wilfred. Winston Churchill protests, but Lord Halifax thinks the only thing Wilfred will do is convince the Norwegians and Swedes to join the Germans. He could be right. As for the German plans for Norway, the Kriegsmarine planners think that now the pressure is off for them to secure the Scandinavian iron, since the Allies no longer have an excuse to land in Norway. Hitler and Grand Admiral Raeder, however, figured that their planning is advanced enough that they should go through with their own Norway invasion. And anyhow, occupation would secure the iron for the future, and it would give the Germans bases that faced the British East Coast and gave swift access to the North Atlantic, though the Germans are already attacking British bases. On the 16th, 15 German bombers attack the British fleet at Scapa Flow. One bomb hits a cruiser and kills 3 officers. A wayward bomb falls on land and kills a civilian, the first British civilian casualty of the war. Winston Churchill tells the War Cabinet, "There was considerable feeling in the country that while the Germans used bombs, we only dropped leaflets." This is true, for a day earlier, 2 British bombers dropped over 6 million propaganda leaflets on Warsaw. Well, a reprisal raid is planned. The British do manage a feat this week. On the 11th is the first aircraft sinking of a U-boat, as U-31 is sunk off Wilhelmshaven by a lone Blenheim. And that is the week a peace treaty is signed between Finland and the Soviet Union, one that causes the Allies to abandon their plans for invading Norway. But Hitler's northern plans are still very much on the table. Yes, the Winter War is over. Finland never got the Allied help they hoped for, and no nation that size could resist the Red Army alone for long, but they fought well. This is from Finnish Commander Carl Gustav Mannerheim's farewell order to the Finnish army. After 16 weeks of bloody combat, with no rest by day or night, our army stands unconquered before an enemy whose strength has grown in spite of terrible losses. Our fate is hard, but we also know that we have paid, to the last penny, any debt we may have owed to the West. That an army so inferior in numbers and equipment should have inflicted such serious defeats on an overwhelmingly powerful enemy is a thing for which it is hard to find a parallel in the history of war. But it is equally admirable that the Finnish people were able to resist giving in to despair, and instead to grow in devotion and greatness. Such a nation has earned the right to live. Our patron of the week is Carter Blumeyer. Thanks to Carter and our other patrons, we are able to make this show. It really is your support that makes it possible. So please support us at either patreon.com or timeghost.tv. And if you have only recently joined us and you want to see our entire coverage of the Winter War, you can click right here for our first episode of that from a few months ago. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.